Welcome to the Dnaz channel. Today, we're going to talk about the Native Americans of New Haven, Connecticut. But first, we have to go back in time. The earliest evidence of peoples coming to New England date back as far as 13,500 years. The people of this time had to endure a harsh environment as they were coming right out of an ice age. If you go back around 2,000 years prior, all of New England was under a mile-high sheet of ice. This was a giant glacier, and this glacier was like a plow coming from the north and pushing all the rock and earth into the Long Island Sound. The melting of this glacier gave way to what is now known as the Connecticut River. This was stretching all the way up to the Canadian border. There was also a massive lake known as Lake Hitchcock. This was a vital source for the Paleo Indians. The Long Island Sound at this point was a freshwater lake and was known to have a greater volume and a waterfall bigger than Niagara Falls. During the time period of the Paleo Indians, the type of environment that was in Connecticut was tundra. This is much different than the forests we have today. But these were perfect hunting grounds which held large creatures. An archaeological site in Avon, Connecticut gives us some of our first evidence of Paleo Indians hunting mammoth, as we found an arrowhead tip with DNA from mammoth on it. After the larger animals died off, we can see how their hunting changed and how bovine creatures entered their diet more frequently. The use of the large river system shows that they were well acquainted with travel by water and by boat. They used to carve trees into boats using the burning method, where they would burn the top of the log and hack away at the rest, making a large canoe boat. When the Dutch first arrived here, they encountered the Quyropi People. This was a tribe that was located on the Connecticut River in New Haven today. They recorded the encounters with these people, and they talked about how they lived in these huts called wigwams, which were large huts made from tree saplings that were bent over and tied together. These wigwams were actually very spacious. There's an account of a Dutch family living here in their townhouse and freezing through a harsh winter. They were invited to stay with the Native Americans, and they recorded on how comfortable the wigwams were. The Quyropi people had an amazing story of their religion, and they embedded the landscape that surrounded them in it. An example of this is the famous Connecticut landmark Sleeping Giant. Sleeping Giant was sacred land to them. This stone giant was a god named Hobomok. Hobomok had a twin brother named Mashop, which was actually the landmark West Rock in New Haven, Connecticut. The Quyropi people's story was that they got into a fight with Mashop and chased him away. He got mad and started throwing boulders back at them, which created the Thimble Islands. By the 1600s, Dutch and English settlers were heavily invading on their land. Not to mention, they brought disease with them. European diseases such as smallpox ran through the communities and decimated about 80% of the native population. The ones that did survive were in the middle of conflict between Dutch and English settlers. A famous war broke out known as the Pequot War, or really the Pequot Massacre, where the English settlers of the time burned a whole village alive containing 400 or more Native Americans. After many years of war, treaties started finally coming around and some peace was starting to happen. But of course, we didn't hold up on our end of the treaties. The interpreters were a huge problem, and we know a lot of shady interpreters. These interpreters were people like Thomas Stanton, Henry Whitfield, and Montnoise. These were very dishonest people. To the Indians, when they worked out a land treaty, they weren't being told of all the fine details. They also didn't have a good concept about owning land. To them, the land was for everybody. You could see that they didn't really understand what they were signing, as most of their signatures were symbols, or they would just draw a simple bow and arrow. One of the main problems was that the Native Americans were travelers, and they used their land by seasons. So they would go away for a season or for the winter, and they would go more inland. And then English settlers would arrive, and they would think that the land is just open and free and nobody's there. And when the Native Americans would come back in the summertime, they would have a bunch of people living on their land, and this created conflict. The town of Brantford was settled in 1686. And the swindler Montnoise got over on the Totucket people by writing a deed. He didn't explain to the Totucket people that they were signing over the entire land of Brantford. So yet again, nothing that the Native Americans signed was actually held up in their deal. The same thing was done to the Quyropi people of New Haven, or the Quinnipiacs. We have documents of a case where a native girl named Shaumpasha is not so happy with the agreements that she made. This situation comes from the Treaty of Guilford. The Guilford people were led by a Native American woman known as Sachem Squaw. That is where we get the name Sachem's Head from, a Connecticut historic landmark. In this document, you see Henry Whitfield making a deal with the Sachem. This is for the sale of Guilford and Stony Creek. As you can see here, the example of the signing of the bow and arrow. And again, we did not hold up on our end. As the years went on, the natives' way of life was dying in this area. The English had turned the environment into villages with fences around houses. In 1675, the King Philip War broke out, and this completely changed the relationship between all the people. Especially with tribes being pushed into small portions of land, the tribes started fighting over land as they were overlapping each other. The Quyropi people and the Pequots started to lose trust in each other, and everything started to fall apart. The downfall of the native people of Connecticut is a huge historic loss, and we are still trying to recover from it today. We are still tracking down the bloodline of the Quinnipiac or the Quyropi people. Hopefully, we can bring back a local tribe if we find them. Today in Connecticut, we have a great relationship between the Native Americans and the American people. This is because of a Native American known as Uncas. Uncas maintained a great deal of friendship between the people and the cultures of his time. There's still a lot to learn from our Native American family that lives with us today. Everyone should be aware of their local reservations and see how much their culture is still thriving. You've been watching the TheDNazChannel. I hope you enjoyed. Like and subscribe. There's more to come. We'll see you next time.